Okay, hello, I'm Ed Burns, and thanks for coming to my talk. Let's get right into it here. Is everyone having a good Jfokus so far? Yes. All right. Pretty awesome keynotes today, I thought. So this is a bit about my credentials. I've been doing development for a very long time. I had the very good fortune to start my career with a lucky break in my choice of university where I happened to go to University of Illinois and Urbana-Champaign, where I got the chance to work on NCSA Mosaic. So I got to do some web from the very beginning and have been able to sort of ride the crest of how that has progressed for the past 25 years or so. And worked first on the client side with a lot of different browser type things. When the Sun AOL Netscape 6 Alliance was happening, I got a chance to work on Netscape 6, and it was funny, the previous talk had all about byte code manipulation. He was showing some JNI code, which I hadn't seen in forever, because the way the Java applet engine used to work was based on JNI, so that was kind of funny to see on a slide in 2020. But we're going to be talking about a lot of old stuff here today. On the server side, I was the spec lead for JSF and for Servlet 4.0 in Java E8. And in June of this year, I switched from working at Oracle for 21 years to starting working at Microsoft. So I'll be talking about today, first of all, I'm using a Windows. I'm not using a Mac anymore. So it was a switch, but thankfully, they have really invested a lot of effort and it's thrown a lot of good skills into the mix too to make the Windows development experience much better than it ever was. Does anyone remember how much of a pain it was to do Cygwin on Windows, to try to get Unixy type stuff? Nowadays, they have the WSL, Windows Subsystem for Linux, and I'm running WSL2, which is really great because the Docker integration is really good. So if you are running a Windows machine and you would like to do Unixy stuff, WSL2 plus the latest Docker preview is a very, very good combination. It's, I think, 100% feature on par with the experience you get in the Mac side. So that's my little OS plug. I've written a few books about JSF and Hudson and continuous integration, and I've spoken at a lot of conferences over the years too. So this is my first time in Sweden. I was supposed to come to Jfokus 10 years ago, but I had a family illness and couldn't make it. So I think it's funny that this picture of me from the web is still up there with no gray hair. So that's fun. So here's my plan for your time investment. There's a lot of great talks going on right now. I mean, Richard Warburton is speaking right now. I think Aaron Gupta is also speaking at the same time. So I'm very humbled that you've chosen to come to this talk. And I hope that we can make the time worth your while. I'm going to talk a little bit more about my brief personal journey in the sense of explaining why it is that Microsoft is doing Java. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I do think it's a story that we need to tell. Is anyone surprised that Microsoft is doing Java now? Yeah? Okay. I was pretty surprised. But when they started staffing up the team and I understood the mission and what they were going after, it made sense. So I hope to explain that to you as well. We'll talk a bit about the breadth and depth of Java on Azure. And then if you did look at the abstract was 5 frameworks and 5 ways to Azure. So as with any super large global scale compute system, which Azure definitely is, there is an enormous amount of variety of ways to get into it. And that's intentional because we're trying to bring all of the world's compute into Azure. And of course, we're facing competition from Amazon and Google as well, and IBM in that regard too. So I could have picked even more than 5 frameworks. But not only is there a huge amount of different ways to get into Azure, but they change over time. When Azure started out, it was primarily a Windows compute system, but now over half of the loads that are running on Azure are Linux-based. And a big portion of those are also running in Java as well. So that's the 5 ways. The ways I'll be focusing on And then the 5 frameworks, Java EE, Helidon, Quarkus, Spring Boot, and no framework at all. And just a simple hello world. So this is not going to be an in-depth code talk, which the previous talk definitely was. The depth of this is to show the breadth of Java and the different ways to get there and how it integrates, and also talk about my story of how I've came to go to Microsoft. So the lesson that I learned, and one of the books I put on there was The Secrets of the Rockstar Programmer's book, and it's a collection of interviews I did with all the different programmers I could find over many years, and learning how they stay current, and coming to conferences is one of the ways to do it. So who here is their first time at Jfokus? Any other first-time Jfocusers? All right, that's good to see. Okay, I don't feel so alone now. But coming to a conference is one way to constantly adapt, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean always changing jobs every 5 years or 2 years or whatever it is. In my case, it was a very long time at the one employer at Oracle and Sun. But companies need to adapt too, and sometimes they have to completely reinvent themselves, and that is one of the things that Microsoft has done since 2014. So, as I mentioned, I started out working on the web browsers, and had a chance to see the very first CGI bin script. One of my college classmates was the inventor of CGI bin, Rob McCool, and this was one of the earliest e-commerce apps ever. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that it gives me a sense of what makes platforms successful and what makes them not successful. At the Java Land conference, which if you get a chance to in Germany is very good, I gave a talk there this year about this topic in depth. It was called Programming Language Platform Growth, and it focused on why some platforms are successful and what you can do to help make your platform even more successful. The relevance to this talk in terms of migrating to the cloud is being present at the birth of the monolith. So I had been doing J2EE for such a long time that I remember when Spring was just an example in Rod Johnson's book, J2EE without EJB. That's the genesis of the Spring framework was, hey man, EJB is a real complicated thing. I'm going to make it easier with operational excellence. And so that right there, that operational excellence thing, if you look at the way things have evolved with the Spring ecosystem and the everything else ecosystem, like Java EE, for example, it comes down to that. The functionality that Spring offers and the functionality that Java EE offers is largely one-for-one compatible and present. But the way Spring did it was very appealing to developers. They focused on the pain points. They made the friction really low and operational excellence type things. And that's why Spring has become as popular as it is. And that's why one of the things I'll be talking about is the new Azure Spring Cloud Service. Anyone using Spring Boot in there? Yeah, of course. So, and then if you're using Spring Boot, then it's an easy step to Spring Cloud. Any Spring Cloud people here? Okay, well that's good. That means you can try it out and see what you think. But all of the hands went up for Spring Cloud, and I'll ask again if there's a lot of people using Java EE. Any Java EE users there? Okay, so that's pretty what I usually see, mostly Spring and some Java EE as well. And what we're focusing on at Microsoft with Java in the enterprise is all of those things. So the operational excellence story I'm talking about is how J2EE had a multi-vendor concept at the beginning. So it wasn't one single company that was making the decisions. There was compromise. There was a multi-vendor concept from the very beginning. And so on the negative side for the technology itself, it's much harder to evangelize because you have companies that are competing with each other actually trying to make this thing successful, whereas Spring is just one company. They can focus all of their efforts on promoting and getting Josh Long on the road 12 months of the year and talking, and that's been great for them. And again, operational excellence. But on the downside, from a community perspective, the absence of a solid community governance model in the form of JCP or now the Eclipse standards process is a bit of a, I think, a negative aspect for the Spring world. If you want to have a direct control and not control, but contribution to the Java EE APIs, the door is open for that. Many of the stuff that's in JSF came from the community. Like the whole facelets concept itself was from the open source, which we brought into the core standard. So you don't see that as much, in my opinion, in the Spring world because it's a single vendor, benign dictatorship, so to speak. Okay, I'll skip through these. So ready through the cloud, right? So I had to, I came up inside of the world of the Monolith, working on WebLogic, working on Glassfish, and those technologies were, and still are, powering lots of enterprises. But since then, people have decided and changed the way that they're architecting systems, and that has helped enterprises meet the scale demands that they need to. But along the side of that, Microsoft has recognized, well, we can't just bank all our Azure on Windows. We need to address Linux. That's why they're investing in WSL. That's why they're investing so much in Linux infrastructure on Azure itself. So there's a parallel between what they were doing and what I was doing in terms of trying to broaden my horizons there. Let's go into Java on Azure. All right, so these are not all of the ways you can get Java into Azure, but there's some of them, and I will be talking about 5 of them today. Java EE on Azure Infrastructure as a Service, Azure Kubernetes Service, Azure Container Instances, Azure App Service, and Azure Spring Cloud Service. This is the big, lots of logo slides for the cloud native on Azure landscape. So this is just a portion of the services that we offer here. There you can see that. Cosmos DB is a global scale document database. Service Fabric is a way to coordinate your app service instances, which I'll talk about in one of the examples. We have SQL Service, App Insights. So one of the things that's been challenging for me is to come into this world of a million things happening all at once and all evolving at different rates and with different sets of documentation and needs, and learning how to integrate Java into all of those things. So several of the people that are on my team, their job is to get with all of these different service teams and find out, hey, how can we make Java fit in here? For example, Active Directory. Azure Active Directory is the single sign-on solution for all of Azure. And it's also in use on Windows PCs. When you sign into a Windows PC, you're actually using an Active Directory thing. And it's very nicely integrated for single sign-on. So we're going to be working with the Java EE communities and Spring communities to better integrate Active Directory with Java technology. So Java EE authentication, for example, and authorization is transparently done through the Active Directory backend. That's just one of the examples. Multi-cloud is also important. If you talk to many customers, they will say, well, we need to have a primary cloud and then a secondary cloud, which we can go to if we need to. We need to at least have a plan to shift to another cloud. And I use the word shift because OpenShift is a really good play for IBM Red Hat there. In my opinion, OpenShift is the main reason. Well, OpenShift and culture are the 2 main reasons that IBM bought Red Hat. So that's turning out to be a good acquisition for them. Pivotal Cloud Foundry is another multi-cloud platform, but that one is not sort of as forward-looking, I think, as OpenShift is. Even though OpenShift itself is quite old and was originally based on a completely different technology than Kubernetes, but now it is a Kubernetes implementation. We have a partnership with Azure Systems. So if you are running Java on Azure, you're likely running in an Azure JDK. And they are an open JDK downstream fork. And we make sure to get all of our patches and updates out to them the same day they're released. When I say out to Azure, the same day they're released. So ultimately up-to-date Java versions. Tools. I have a 15-minute talk tomorrow on Visual Studio Code. for Java. Any Visual Studio Code users out there? Cool. Okay, hopefully we can get some more if you come to my talk tomorrow. DevOps is a huge aspect for us. We have, of course, GitHub and the new GitHub Actions, and we also have Azure DevOps. So most of inside of Microsoft is working on Azure DevOps, running that. All of our pipelines are built on that. So these are the frameworks I will be talking about today. Contemporary Java frameworks, Jakarta EE, which started out as J2EE and went to Java EE, and now it's Jakarta EE. Quarkus and Helidon are two frameworks that use Jakarta EE APIs and also additional APIs in the form of microprofile to allow developer skills to be portable to this new microservices world. And that's one of the things that I really do want to stress about using open standard APIs, is the value proposition of learn one stack and continue to develop skills and build skills in that stack over the course of your career, rather than having to just not necessarily go all the way back to zero when you change a stack, because you're always learning things, and the longer you progress in your career, the more you recognize things aren't really new. And if you stick around long enough, everything comes back around in a big circle. But it's still important to have skills that you can carry forward in a direct fashion, right? If you learn how to use JPA, or if you learn how to use JAX-RS, you can count on those things continuing to move forward. Spring Boot originally started out as a way to bootstrap people into using the Spring framework, but has evolved into a microservices lightweight stack thing, even though the Spring framework itself is anything but light in terms of the number of dependencies it requires you to have, and in terms of what it does with class manipulation for doing injection and stuff. And of course, Java EE does that as well. There's more frameworks. I only picked these 5. If you looked at the abstract over time, you might have seen the abstract change. And the reason is, this talk was originally supposed to be given by my colleague Bruno Borges, but he was unable to attend, and he asked me to come in his stead. So I'm very thankful to him, and also to Matthias for allowing me to come, Matthias Carlson. And the last framework is no framework. I just want to show how you can have a plain old Java SE app that's doing something on the server side and run that easily in Azure App Service. So for each of these frameworks, I'm going to examine some common aspects of each, look at what its API governance model is, talk about the primary way people work with it, how you write code, how you package it, what the build system commonly is used, and the basic idea of creating and running an app. So here's first Jakarta EE. The API is based on JCP and then now the Eclipse specification process. In contrast to many of the newer style frameworks, it's definitely IDE based. You don't really see people doing too much Java EE development where they do on the command line and type this and now the thing's deployed, and type some more stuff and other stuff's deployed. It's designed from a world where you deploy stuff from your IDE with plugins and such. The build system, because it's been around forever, you can use whatever you like, but in practice, mostly people use Maven. And for creating an app, the process is mostly people use run a Maven archetype, or a lot of your native IDEs, IntelliJ, NetBeans, have file new project, new Java EE project, whatever it is. And that's strictly based on the IDE itself. Okay. So this is the sample Java EE app that I'm going to show. It's just a simple WebLogic on Azure tutorial there. I've got the link for this, and I will be uploading the slides. But this is just the REST endpoint that's, it's a coffee store, right? So it's basically CRUD, and it does show Azure PostgreSQL service running, and just a simple REST application. The next one I want to touch on is Helidon. Has anyone heard of Helidon? Okay, it's a really good framework, and it carries forth, I think, a lot of what we wanted to do with Java EE and brings it forward into the world of microservices. It is a microprofile implementation. It has two different flavors, the microprofile flavor and the SE flavor, which is a functional programming API. The build system is Maven, and you can create app with this architect and archetype rather. And the running of the app is running a fat jar, Java jar. And from there, I will show or explain. You take the next step, take the jar, package it in a Docker container, and then take that and run that in Azure in some way or another. So I'll talk about that. So the Hello World for Helidon is really just a JAX-RS application. This is not all of it, though. It's just a Hello World example. Quarkus is similar, really functioning in the same space as Helidon is, but it focuses a lot more on, tries to emphasize the Gradle runtime engine for doing native binaries, which are very easy to package then into Docker containers. So the sample I will show will do that. It is, again, microprofile and Java EE based, and pretty much the same set of parameters that I just displayed for Helidon. So you have a choice. Now, one of the things that I find very interesting is now we have these different frameworks, and it's, on the one hand, a much more exciting time to be in the Java space than it was just 5 years ago when these things weren't around. Microservices has really reinvigorated the Java world, and that's exciting. So now not only do you have these two, but you also have Micronaut. There is also Spark Java, there's Ratpack. So it reminds me a little bit of the old days of the web framework wars, where there was a time when you could choose, in the Java side, you could choose JSF, Struts, Tapestry, Wicket, WebWork. There's a million of them. So it's still competitive in this new space, which is kind of fun. So a Quarkus Hello World is, again, it's a JAX-RS application. Spring Boot. Here we have the API standard is proprietary. It's all defined by Spring, but it does have some dependencies on Java EE APIs. For example, it uses Servlet, and it uses JPA. So one of the things that's interesting with the success of, or this is still in question if it will be a success or not, of Jakarta EE is Spring is very dependent on it. And so one of the things that the Jakarta EE team is trying to figure out is, since Oracle said, no, you can't evolve the packages in the Java EE namespace, JavaX namespace, they had to rename all of the packages. And that's going to have a big impact on Spring. So we'll have to see what they do about that. The create app experience for Spring is a little bit different. You usually go to start Spring.io, or you can run that from the command line as well. And download the zip, or have the command line download it for you. And oops, there's a typo there. It's not Quarkus dev, it would be Spring Boot deploy or exec. And finally, no framework. I did want to put this out there because there are times where you just really want to either do something super quick and don't want all the baggage of having to understand a framework. But there are also some times where your problem space doesn't need all that extra complexity. So showing that I can deploy java-jar on a simple HTTP server to Azure is something that is worth pointing out, I think. So this is that there. I actually makes use of the ComSun HTTP server class. And this is actually from Stack Overflow, which itself is taken from the Java doc for the class. So it's just a main class that starts an HTTP server and listens and sends out a hello world there. So we'll put all of those up on Azure. So this is our ways to Azure. This is our set of frameworks. So we're going to take Jakarta EE and show it running on Java EE Azure. We're going to take Helidon and show it running on Azure Container Instances. We're going to take Quarkus and show it running on Azure Kubernetes Service. We're going to take plain old Java and run it on Azure App Service. And we're going to take Spring Boot and run it on Azure Spring Cloud Service. And so because we don't have too much time, and there's 5 of these things, we're going to move pretty quickly through that. All right. So the first one, Java EE to Azure with virtual machines. This is the thing that I'm working on most as my day job right now at Microsoft. And it's very fortunate because in June of 2019, Oracle and Microsoft announced a partnership where you can run your middleware in Azure and run your database in Oracle. And we have co-located data centers for many of the different regions where our customers are, and Oracle's customers are as well, and high-speed interconnect between the two data centers. So you can, if you want to migrate your stuff to the cloud, you can get your WebLogic on Azure and keep your Oracle and your rack in your OCI. And these offers are in the Azure Marketplace. I'll be showing that. And they're published, maintained, and supported by Oracle. Let's see. They do support what you expect from WebLogic, clustering, static and dynamic clustering. The admin server is there, which I will show. So this is what it looks like. You have an ARM template, which is the Azure Resource Manager. It's basically a gigantic JSON file that describes all of the things that go into standing up your infrastructure on Azure. And I do want to point out that Azure also has Terraform and Ansible as ways to describe your architecture for moving it into Azure. But the only way you can get stuff into the Azure Marketplace is by using an ARM template. So as an enterprise, you can, if you're using Terraform or Ansible, you're able to do all of that to craft and interact with Azure. But if you want to create offers for the Azure Marketplace, you have to learn how about this ARM business, and that's what we're helping Oracle with. And this is the standard way a WebLogic domain looks like. You have a node manager service, which talks to similar node managers on all of the cluster nodes, and this coordination allows the scaling up and scaling down of WebLogic. Now, this is not like Kubernetes scale up, scale down, although that is coming through the Oracle WebLogic operator, which can run on Azure Kubernetes service, but I'm not going to be showing that today. That's down the roadmap. So this is the link for the tutorial, Azure WLS, and let's now go into the demo for that. Okay, so this is just my set of notes for the demo. So if you can't read it, that's, it's not going to be too bad. It's mostly for me to copy and paste from. There. All right, so let's go to the Azure portal. This is it right here. And let's go and just do create a resource. This is, you go to portal.azure.com. And this is the marketplace. So you can type anything you want pretty much and find something that will work here. So I'll type WebLogic. And you'll see the choices that I have. And if you just click this, it will bring you a nice wizard where you can fill out some values and eventually end up with a fully provisioned WebLogic cluster ready for you to use. It takes a while to do because it's not intended to be dynamic. This is infrastructure as a service. So the target market we're going after with this offer is lift and shift customers. So is anyone working on lift and shift, trying to get their offers, get their workloads into the cloud without re-architecting, trying to just do the minimum necessary to get it into the cloud? Anyone here like that? Okay. So more enterprisey banks and insurance companies and more standard enterprises are the target market for that. So once you have deployed your WebLogic cluster in this way, you can, let me just filter this. These are all the resource groups for this demo. This particular system has an admin VM and 2 worker nodes, and it also has an Azure App Gateway, which is one of 3 different load balancing solutions we have. So let's show the admin console running there. Where is it? 7001. 7001. There it is. Okay. So yes, it is 2020, and I am showing you a WebLogic Admin Console. But the novelty here is that it is running on Azure, and it was provisioned with relatively little work. So then I have an application that's been deployed, and this is what it looks like. This is that one I had the link for. It's called Azure Cafe. It's just a simple CRUD application. And it has a web front end, which is built on JSF, so I can show you the code for that. Let me do this, WebLogic Cafe, and source main web app. This is Visual Studio Code, and it has a whole big raft of extensions. So I'll talk about more of that tomorrow. But one of the things that I had to come to terms with coming to Microsoft was, is anyone a fan of Eclipse out there? Okay, well, one brave person. One of the things I didn't like about Eclipse was just you could get it into an unworkable state by installing a whole bunch of plugins that didn't work with each other, and it was a real pain. Now, Visual Studio Code is kind of walking on the same tightrope because they depend very heavily on extensions for everything. So, YAML and XML and Java and Python, everything is done with extensions. So, so far, I haven't run into that problem where you can get your system in a broke down state that way, but we'll see, because it can get out of hand pretty quickly. Anyhow, let's take a look at the REST API model Cafe repository. That's the database integration using EJB, I'm sorry, not EJB, JPA, Entity Manager. And the REST API is right here. So this is that thing where you can post to create a coffee, and I'll show that working. So let me go to where I have the file saved. Jfokus. Okay, and let me grab that cheat sheet data. Okay. Here's the REST service, I showed that. And let's just create a new coffee entry. So we're going to medium.xml, and we'll just change this ID to 02. I'll say 02, because you can see it's going to be loaded. Here we're going to do a post. And we are posting to the Azure App Gateway, which will find the backend node and set that up in the database correctly. So you can see it gave us back a 201 created, and if we go and reload the page, we should see number 2 coming there, maybe. There it is. Okay. So I talked about the packaging story. For the IaaS, at every level of the infrastructure as a service, we want to make it as similar to what you're already doing. So if you're using the WebLogic Maven plugin, that will still work. If you're using a CI/CD that uses Oracle T3 scripts to talk to admin server, that will still work as well. So it's one for one from what you expect. Okay. Next up, we'll go to Helidon. Okay. Helidon is going to be using Azure Container Instances. Now, Azure Container Instances is basically Kubernetes without all of the Kubernetes-y stuff. You're not having to write YAML. There's no container orchestration layer. If you just have one image and you want to scale it up or scale it down, but you don't really need to have a ton of different kinds of images working together, or you want to do that yourself, Azure Container Instances is great for that. Also, Azure Container Instances is where the Azure Container Registry lives, which, of course, Kubernetes is entirely dependent on. So in this aspect of the demo, I'll talk through how we take a Helidon app and package it into a Docker image and then deploy it to Azure Container instances. All right, so this is a link that you can follow, which will show the tutorial aspects behind this. So let me show it here in the demo. Okay. Here we are. All Before coming into the room and setting up, I had several command line commands I had to execute. There is an Azure CLI that is very well done. It's actually written in Python, and it has extensions for all of the different services that Azure has. And there also is a PowerShell API for this as well, which is kind of a history from the pre-Linux embracing days. But most of the people that are using Azure that I've encountered go straight with the Azure Linux-style CLI. So what I am doing first is creating a resource group with this command here, and then I'm pushing the Helidon image to the container. Now, if you go to helidon.io, where's my browser? Here we are. I'm going to close some tabs. Here we go. Helidon.io. This is where that tutorial will take you, and it's a very beautifully done website too. But basically all I've done was follow the getting started here, which takes you up to the point where you're putting it in a Docker image. So once you've made your Docker image locally, I've got it here, Docker images, grep Helidon, and you should see if Docker is still running. Looks like it is. Yeah, there we are. So some images I built locally, and let's take a look at what they look like in the portal. So if I go over here, back to my resource groups, and the Azure Container Registry is in resource group 020301K. Okay. So we have two things inside this resource group, the AKS cluster, which I'll show later when it comes to Quarkus, and the container registry, which is used by both the Quarkus and the Helidon demos. So this is full-featured thing. It's like Sonatype Nexus or JFrog Artifactory, but it has a lot more benefits when it comes to Azure integration. For example, and quite importantly, integration with the Azure Security Service. So anyone using Docker in their enterprise at this point? Okay. Is anyone in the IT department getting on your case about the fact that your from clause includes an image that hasn't been CVE patched for this other kind of thing that happened there? This is what I call Docker hygiene. So it's a very important thing in enterprises, and Azure Security Center handles that all for you. It provides either automatic patching or reports on where your red lines are. If you're not, let's see, go back. I think this has a little screen grab of the dashboard where you can see, container, there it is. So it'll show you all the vulnerabilities that you might have in your Docker images that are in that registry. And that's also nice because it's well integrated with the Azure VMs as well. Every VM that runs inside of Azure has one of these agents that's able to look for unpatched vulnerabilities. So that's a nice benefit that you get. Okay. What else do I want to show about Azure Container Instances? So let's look in here, repositories. There we are. And you can see my getting started one. There it is. So this is the Quarkus, this is the Helidon, and if you click on this, you'll see the different tags I've pushed there. So, it's a full-featured container repository. So let's just show that we are able to access the Docker image after it's been pushed. We create the container. It gives you this big old JSON back, which you don't need except for the IP address. And where's my curl here? All right. Where's IP? Here it is, the script. And so this is the greeting service that is in the Helidon app. And let's just run that here on the command line. So you can see it is just returning the hello world. All right, next up is play from start. I'm glad I clicked that one. Kubernetes service. So Kubernetes, anyone using Kubernetes? Okay, does anyone love how easy it is to use? Yeah, okay. What we're trying to go after with that, with Kubernetes service, is to make it as easy as possible to use Kubernetes, but not just in a toy way, fully featured, actual enterprise grade. I will skip through and mention that here, but it's everything you expect from Kubernetes. And in fact, we hired many years ago Brendan Burns, not related to me. He's one of the co-founders of Kubernetes, and he is directing the development of Azure Kubernetes Service at Azure. So you can trust that it's going to be 100% a good thing with the way the core Kubernetes project is developed. Okay, so these are the steps here. Build the Quarkus app locally, use Graal to make a native executable, use Docker to package the executable in a Docker image, deploy the image to container registry, create a Kubernetes cluster, which is just a few clicks or commands rather, hit the deployment, and then hit the load balancer. So I'm going to skip to the end there and just say Quarkus. There we are. Here it is. There, let's hit the greeting. Now I had a demo where I was showing you could do kubectl apply and it would give you a different container image, but there's not going to be time for that. So I'll just show the one being deployed here, or not deployed, run. So we're hitting Quarkus, and it's giving you back hello Quarkus. And you could just do a kubectl apply with the provided YAML file and see the other version as well. Next up is Spring. Play from current slide. Yes, so this one I'm really excited about, Azure Spring Cloud Service. It only premiered in October of this past year. It's a fully managed PaaS. And if you're running Spring Boot and you want to get into the cloud and you don't want to do all of the Spring Cloud infrastructure yourself, it's a really great service. You can see it handles integration, CI/CD, building and managing of clusters, monitoring, logging, patching, scaling. All of that is handled by the pivotal Microsoft partnership. So we want to ask you to let Microsoft and Pivotal manage all of this for you, and you just have to focus on your core application infrastructure, application development itself. We handle all the infrastructure. Also, we have a lot of great monitoring. You can see call flow access, logging, Azure Monitor Insights. Our roadmap for this is going to be having GA in the second quarter of this year. So that's what we're targeting. And one of the important things that we're bringing this quarter is VNet integration. Most enterprises that are using Spring Boot want to go to the cloud. They need to have corporate access, secure network access from their own private networks, and that's what VNet can give you. Okay, that's the link to the demo there. So let me just quickly show the very simple Spring example. Here we are. Okay, so when you go to visit the Spring Cloud in the Azure portal, it gives you a test endpoint, which lets you access the service. And this is just pre-configured with HTTP basic authentication here. So this big mess of string here in the beginning is just your HTTP authentication. So none of the other apps or frameworks I'm showing came with that by default. So I think that's kind of interesting. So if we run this curl here, we'll see another hello world. And this one is going to Kubernetes. Another thing I do want to point out as co-spec lead of Servlet 4, which brings HTTP2 to Java EE, this is based on HTTP2. So if you see it's doing the full, all the benefits of HTTP2. There's some talks from me on YouTube. If you're curious about HTTP2 and how it applies to Servlet, you can just search for that from Java 1, 2016, I think it was. Yes, streams is one of the things that I was very happy to see. Oh, it's working out of the box. Okay, the last one is the fun one. We have 5 minutes, perfect. Azure App Service Linux. So not just Java, right? We have .NET, Node, PHP, Python, ways to run all of these kind of things very simply on Azure. So I'll show that one in the portal. let's see here, app service. No framework. Here we are. Let's look at that resource group. 020401A. All right, resource groups. Here we are. So this one is, you can see, an Azure App Service. We have the App Service plan. This is where you can control your how it's going to be scaling. You can also see the monitoring here. So I'm not able to, I don't have time to show you the depth and breadth of everything you can do in the portal here, but it's extremely, all of the services I've shown here are very well integrated into the portal, and everything you can do is easy to use and monitor, but it's also 100% scriptable, because it's all built on top of REST APIs. So we get that automation is the key. If something can't be automated and repeated, it's not worth doing. So the portal is nice because it shows you nice graphs and charts and such. But just know that everything underneath is completely scriptable and CI/CD friendly. Okay, so that's the app service plan, and then the app itself is right here, and it will give you the URL, and I think we can just click on it. No, let's copy it. There we go. Oh, not found. I think I need to do one other thing. I need to say test at the end. Yeah, there you go. Test. There you go. So hello world. And if there was time, I guess there might be time for me to try to make a change and redeploy it. Let's try it and see how fast it goes. Let's see here. Hello world farm. No framework, I think it's called. Yeah, no framework. And source main hello world server, we'll just change this value to something else. 1445. Okay, save it, and then let's redeploy it, which is just a Maven command right here. We're going to be using the Azure Web App Deploy Maven plugin. And we'll run it and redeploy it. Here. Hello World Farm, no framework. All right. And I could have done this in Visual Studio Code, but I know Emacs better. So the reason I'm doing this one is because it actually might have a chance of finishing deploying in the scope that we have and the time that we have. Anyone working with Jfokus and Graal? Yeah. I found that the process of creating a native executable image took about 10 minutes on this machine. So that was a little bit surprisingly long. Everything else was like really quick, fast turnaround, but doing the instrumentation and creating the native image took a little bit of time. It even says that in the documentation. Successfully updated web app. Okay. And so the POM configuration for this is pretty simple too. I can pull that up while we're going. POM.xml. And you just declare Azure Web App Maven plugin, the subscription ID, app name and region. So it's very simple to do. And if we load this again, we'll see 1445. So we did do an update in pretty quick turnaround. So that is 5 frameworks in 5 ways. I hope it has given you a flavor that Microsoft is very committed to bringing Java workloads to Azure. And we're hoping that you'll come by our booth, and I'll be there today and tomorrow as well. And come to my VS Code Talk. Thank you for your time.